This tutorial is on APA, the American Psychological Association style you love to hate. This title was created facetiously to reflect the fact that many students and scholars dread all of the rules associated with scholarly writing and APA style. How many of you wake up in the morning and think, gosh, I just can't wait to do some more writing in APA style? In this session, we will explore why we have writing conventions such as APA and hopefully demystify this to some degree. I can't guarantee that you will come away loving APA, but I can promise that you will have a better appreciation for why we have writing conventions and the purpose that they serve our scholarly community. Prior to the creation of the printing press and movable type, all documents were written by hand. Manuscripts were copied and letters and documents written in ink by hand. Because of this, spelling was not really standardized. Many authors spelled phonetically. There was also very little by way of punctuation used in writing. The reader had to know by context where sentences began and ended. Scholars tended to write in Latin, and spelling for that language was more standardized because it followed ancient manuscripts. The invention of the printing press and movable type in the mid-15th century brought more uniformity to spelling and punctuation. Printers had to make decisions and settle on spelling conventions. There was also more uniformity in what the letters of the alphabet looked like, what we would call a typeface. As an example of various spellings, we have on record 3 original signatures from William Shakespeare. In each one, he spelled his name differently. It's not that the bard didn't know how to spell his name. It's more likely that in his day, creative spelling was the mark of a gentleman. While the printing press made many books widely available, the invention of the typewriter allowed individuals to write with more ease. The typewriter was invented in the mid-1800s, and so has not been around for as long. Typing on a manual typewriter required a lot of dexterity and physical strength to strike the keys in a consistent way and at high speeds. It was sometimes possible to pinpoint who had typed a document by the particular stresses that each typist placed on individual letters. Thus, typists had a kind of signature in their craft. The next significant advance in printing was the development of the electric typewriter. It is similar to a mechanical typewriter, with each stroke powered by an electric motor. This allowed for a more consistent pattern of letters and allowed for greater speed of typing. Of course, the biggest advance came with the development of computerized word processing programs. Not only were the new keyboards faster, but they opened a wide range of options in the presentation of a document in terms of typeface, font size, formatting, and the ability to share and publish documents. Over the centuries, writing conventions and spelling changed with the medium of the printing. Consider the convention for how to indicate the title of a book. Until the 1980s, the title of a book was underlined to make it stand out. Why? Because a typewriter was limited to one typeface and one font size. In order to indicate a book title, the typist had to first type the name of the book with the first letter of major words capitalized. Then they had to backspace and start all over again, this time hitting the underscore key to type a line underneath the title. The underscore formed a solid line. Italics were not an option. With the advent of word processing and the ease of shifting between typefaces and fonts, book titles could now be presented in italics, a style that distinguishes the title but is also easier on the eyes. If an author chooses, the title can now even be bolded, something not possible with a manual typewriter. Here is another example. To separate out a theory or construct on a typewriter, quotation marks were used. With word processing, it is possible to use italics. Why did this writing convention change? Well, because it could. It was now possible. The nature of the medium someone used would determine the options available for presenting readable script. On a typewriter, options for highlighting social learning theory were more limited. With word processing programs, the options have greatly expanded. Because the options for how letters, words, and text have expanded over the years, so have the conventions that we use in writing. Correct spelling is enshrined in our dictionaries, and there are now many creative options for fonts, typefaces, and formatting of documents. But disciplines such as the social sciences are very specific about the use of these conventions for scholarly writing and formatting. These standards include the organization of content in a document, the writing style, citing references, and how to prepare a manuscript for publication in certain disciplines. The conventions that we use as scholars are not random. Some are designed for readability. Some emphasize the identification of the sources we are using in a particular argument. Overall, the purpose is to advance scholarship and have consistency in presentation. You will always know how a document will be organized, how to find your way around, and what the citations mean. You will not have to do any second guessing. Let's begin with the types of letters that make up the words we read. There are two major classifications of fonts: serif font and sans serif font. The word serif refers to the feet or strokes at the end of the lines of the letter. The term sans serif means without feet. Here you can see the lines of the font are more simplified and clean. Serif fonts are considered easier to read in printed text. Books, newspapers, and magazines tend to use serif fonts. Originally, dissertations were published only in serif fonts, in particular Times New Roman or Courier. But the tables within a dissertation were in sans serif fonts. Sans serif fonts are used for headlines. The text is considered easier to read on computer screens because you can get higher resolution. The most legible fonts are considered to be Arial and Verdana. One of the reasons APA suggests specific fonts is to highlight readability. Up until about 15 years ago, most dissertations would be read on a printed page of some sort. Now, the majority of dissertation documents are read on computer screens or tablets. This is in part responsible for a change in options for the font of a document, from serif only to allowing sans serif fonts. It is an example of changes occurring based on the medium of delivery. For dissertations and scholarly papers, APA now allows for more fonts, including both serif and sans serif fonts. Here are some recommended fonts. It is important to note that a document may not mix fonts. Text and headings should all be in one typeface. Here is another principle of using fonts. Using all caps may be good for shouting at someone on a text, but they are more difficult to read. Take a moment to slightly defocus your eyes and look at the line in all caps. It is blocky, and letters do not distinguish themselves, meaning that your neural visual processing has to work harder to decode the words. Below, you can see that capitalizing the first letter of the word allows more of the character of each letter to stand out, and thus enhance readability. Another feature of printed text that makes a difference is whether text is left justified or centered. This is an example of the same text in each format. The top is left justified. You can tell by the ragged edge on the right. The text below is centered, and the spacing between words is adjusted to accommodate a straight right edge. If you look closely, you can see the varied spacing between letters. This block text is considered harder to read than the left justified above because of the equal spacing between words in the left justified. This is another example of changes brought about by word processing. A typewriter could never type in block style because it was limited to equal spacing between letters. I invite you to think about APA style and what it emphasizes. One of the features of APA is that citations are literally in the text in front of you. APA is used in most of the social science disciplines. What this says is that as social scientists, we value bringing together many voices to a discussion, and we want to know who those voices are. The reader wants to judge whether those voices are credible or not. They want to know where the ideas are coming from. Here is a good example. This is the opening paragraph of a scholarly article. Opening paragraphs often begin with sweeping statements and thus require a lot of citations. The author wants you to know that a lot of really smart people agree with and support these sweeping statements. So it is not unusual to have 3 or 4 or even more citations for every sentence. This paragraph is literally 2 sentences with 10 citations. Consider that almost half of the words in this paragraph are citations. This is a lot of space and architecture to devote to citations. Why is this? Because in the social sciences, we value a gathering of voices and knowing who those voices are and when they spoke. And so we are willing to sacrifice a lot of the white space on the page to make that happen. In many texts, you will see little numbers that refer the reader to a note at the end of a chapter or a footnote to determine the citations. Social scientists, on the other hand, want them right in front of their face. And that is why APA protects that for us with the conventions around citations. Another important feature of APA is academic honesty. Every line of a scholarly text should be clear as to whom is speaking. Is it the author or someone else? Every idea that is not original to you should be cited then. Anytime you paraphrase or quote someone else's ideas, you need a citation. So, Overall, citations are a good thing. Here are a couple key principles. In a literature review, you will summarize and cite the literature. What is original to you is the analysis, critique, and conclusions. It should be clear what is your contribution as distinct from others. Citations typically involve the author's last name, the year of the publication date, plus a page number if there is a quotation. Citations may either be in the text or in parentheses at the end. The above example shows the authors being mentioned in the text and the year only in parentheses. Below, the entire citation is in parentheses. The choice of which one to use will likely depend on the flow of the narrative, whether the author wants to highlight the author's name for emphasis, or other stylistic considerations. Often authors will use a combination of both in-text and parenthetical citations for variety. APA has expanded the many ways of citing podcasts, webinars, videos, and YouTubes in response to what is being cited now in manuscripts. Why is this? Well, because more and more authors are citing online and digital sources. Therefore, new conventions for citing these have been developed. 40 or 50 years ago, almost all citations would be limited to scholarly articles and books. This is another example of how APA style has changed with the times, responding to the various media for printing and projecting text, and the various sources that are being cited. In addition to exploring the APA manual, an excellent online resource for learning or verifying APA citations and guidelines is Purdue OWL from Purdue University. Here you can easily search for the specific rule you are looking for. Just Google Purdue OWL online and you will find this site. If you're going to be writing many scholarly papers or a dissertation, you may consider getting software that manages your citations and references. Once your citation data are stored, these programs can configure the information in a variety of ways for references and citations. EndNote is a program that is Mac compatible. Biblioscape is Windows only. Zotero is a free online program and resource, and RefWorks is also web-based. When writing scholarly papers, you are required to cite your sources. A question that often arises is how often do I use a direct quote as opposed to paraphrasing or summarizing another author's ideas? When you use a quote, you should have a purpose. You may want to share an author's definition of a particular construct with precision, so you use their own words. Perhaps an author says something in a way that is more eloquent than you. You may also want to intersperse quotes into your narrative when you are doing a lot of summarizing and you want to break up the flow and bring in another voice. However, you are cautioned not to overuse quotations. A literature review is not a string of quotes from other sources. After all, people are reading your paper because they want to hear what you are thinking. As a very loose general rule, think in terms of no more than 2 quotes per page, or 1 quote per paragraph. There may be exceptions to this if you are bringing together 4 or 5 definitions of a particular concept or construct. But in general, be strategic in your use of quotes. Here are a few guidelines for using direct quotes. Introduce the quote in the text so that it has some context. Don't just leave it hanging there. Make sure you have a purpose for using it. Use quotes for defining terms and constructs. If you are defining a term according to an author, it's a good time to use a quote. Use a quote for reinforcing a message or for author clarity. Use quotes to bring in other voices, but not so many that your own voice does not come through. Scholarly works do tend to privilege peer-reviewed articles and edited books as reliable sources. However, some scholars are prolific and do not write articles, but instead write scholarly books. These may also be good sources. A well-known scholar may be a guest on a podcast, and citing from that would still be considered scholarly. There may be reasons why you would want to reference or cite a popular book, perhaps to make comments about the popular understanding of trends or ideas. If you do cite a popular book, indicate that in the text so that it is clear to the reader. There may be instances when you want to quote data and statistics on demographics, census data, or other trends. Online sources are a good source for such data and are often up to date. If you do cite online sources, they should be credible, such as a website sponsored by a legitimate organization. Sometimes students ask if they can cite a dissertation. In general, you want to go to the same sources that the dissertation author used and cite that source. However, if a dissertation brings in critical information that cannot be found anywhere else, or was a critical study not summarized elsewhere, then it is fine to cite a dissertation. Yes, APA style has a lot of rules and conventions. A lot. But they can be learned and mastered in a short time. Here are some ideas for doing that. Study APA documents and note how sources are being cited. Use EndNote or some other computer program for organizing your references and citations. Trade your writing with another student. Use the virtual writing lab, or use an APA editor to help you with learning more about APA style.